James Stratton walked through the opulent lobby of the Paramount Regency Hotel, the echo of his polished leather shoes a sharp counterpoint to the murmur of arriving guests. Dressed in a tailored navy suit with a meticulously knotted tie, James radiated an aura of unyielding control. This hotel was his kingdom, and he relished the power that came with ruling it. "Mr. Stratton," a young concierge named Emily called timidly as he passed. Without breaking stride, James offered a perfunctory nod, his eyes scanning every detail of the space. A vase of orchids tilted slightly to the left caught his attention, and he motioned to a passing porter. "That arrangement should be centered. This is a 5-star establishment, not a garden center." The porter hurried to comply, leaving James to continue his patrol. Precision was everything, and James demanded nothing less than perfection. At the front desk, Lisa, the reception manager, was frantically typing on her computer. Sensing chaos, James approached. "Lisa," he barked, his tone clipped. "Why hasn't the presidential suite been finalized for Mr. Hartman? He's arriving in under an hour." Lisa's hands faltered over the keyboard, her face pale. "There was a mix-up with the previous guest, but it'll be ready." "No excuses," James interrupted. "I want it perfect, and I want it now." Lisa nodded, swallowing her nerves, and James turned sharply, pleased with his ability to command action. As he moved toward his office, snippets of conversation between 2 housekeepers floated toward him. "Did you hear? A top executive from Horizon Global is staying here," one whispered. "Shh," the other warned. "Mr. Stratton will lose it if he catches us gossiping." A faint smirk tugged at James's lips. His staff understood the importance of discretion. It was part of what made this hotel the pinnacle of luxury. Later that day, as James surveyed the bustling lobby, his gaze fell upon a family standing at the reception desk. The Browns. A well-dressed couple with a young boy, they carried themselves with quiet dignity. Mr. Brown's sharp charcoal suit fit like it was made for him, and Mrs. Brown's floral silk dress complemented her elegant demeanor. Their son, dressed in a mini version of his father's attire, fidgeted as children often do. James's instincts flared. Something about them seemed out of place, though he couldn't quite pinpoint what. He approached the desk with purpose. "Good afternoon," he greeted, his voice measured but cool. "I'm James Stratton, the hotel manager. Is there an issue here?" Mrs. Brown turned toward him with a calm smile. "Not at all. Lisa has been very helpful." James nodded curtly, his gaze shifting between the family and Lisa. "Lisa, a moment?" Pulling her aside, he lowered his voice. "Are you certain they've booked the grand suite? Double-check their reservation." Lisa frowned but obeyed, her confusion evident. "Yes, Mr. Stratton. The booking was made weeks ago. Everything is in order." Still uneasy, James said, "Keep an eye on them. We can't afford to overlook anything." When he returned to the family, his professional smile masked the distrust simmering beneath. "We hope you enjoy your stay," he said, though his tone lacked the warmth the words suggested. As James made his rounds, the sight of the Browns lingered in his thoughts. Unable to suppress his unease, he confronted them again near the elevators. "I couldn't help but notice your suite selection," he began, his voice ringing louder than intended. "Are you certain you're aware of the associated cost?" Mr. Brown stiffened, his expression calm but firm. "Yes, we're aware. Is there a problem?" "Well," James replied, his tone patronizing, "the Grand Suite is our most exclusive option. We wouldn't want there to be any confusion when the bill is due." Mrs. Brown stepped forward, her posture regal. "We're more than capable of affording this stay, Mr. Stratton. Your insinuations are unnecessary." The room seemed to hush, the attention of other guests and staff turning toward the confrontation. Their son tugged at his mother's hand, his voice barely a whisper. "Mommy, did we do something wrong?" Mrs. Brown knelt, smoothing his hair. "Of course not, darling." James, unmoved by the tension, crossed his arms. "I'm simply ensuring there are no misunderstandings." With a measured sigh, Mr. Brown reached into his pocket, producing a folded piece of paper. "Mr. Stratton," he said evenly, extending the note, "I think you'll find this of interest. James took it with visible disdain, shoving it into his pocket without reading it. "Thank you. I trust you'll enjoy your stay." The next morning, James arrived at the hotel through the staff entrance, a route he had never taken before. His usual tailored suit was replaced with a simple work shirt and sturdy pants, and he carried an unfamiliar nervous energy. The bustling back-of-house corridors, filled with the clatter of carts and the hum of chatter, were a stark contrast to the polished serenity of the lobby he was used to. Maria, one of the senior housekeepers, greeted him with a raised eyebrow. "Mr. Stratton?" she asked, her voice laced with skepticism. "What are you doing here?" "I'm here to work," James replied, his voice faltering. Maria crossed her arms, clearly unimpressed. "Work, huh? Well, let's see how long you last." She handed him a cleaning cart piled high with supplies. James hesitated, the weight of the cart surprising him as he pushed it down the narrow hallway. His first assignment was a suite on the 5th floor. The irony wasn't lost on him. It wasn't long ago that he had inspected these rooms with an air of superiority, pointing out flaws with little thought to the labor required to fix them. The work was grueling. By the time he finished scrubbing the bathroom tiles and changing the bedding, his back ached and sweat clung to his brow. The elegant illusion of the hotel faded in the face of the relentless physical effort it took to maintain it. At lunch, James sat awkwardly in the staff cafeteria, clutching a plain sandwich. The room buzzed with conversation and laughter, a camaraderie he had never been part of. Maria and a few others sat at a nearby table, casting curious glances his way. Finally, Juan, a maintenance worker James barely remembered, approached. "Mind if I sit?" James shook his head. Juan settled across from him, opening a container of leftovers. "So, Mr. Stratton? No, wait, just James now, right? How's your first day as one of us?" James managed a weary smile. "It's humbling." Juan chuckled. "Yeah, it's not easy. But we make it work. Everyone here looks out for each other. You'll see." For the first time, James felt a crack in the wall he had built between himself and his staff. He listened as Juan talked about his family, his love for carpentry, and the pride he took in his work. It was a side of his employees James had never cared to see before. By the end of the day, James was exhausted. His hands were raw, his muscles sore, but a small part of him felt a flicker of satisfaction. For once, he had done the kind of work he had always taken for granted. The following weeks brought more of the same. Each day, James worked alongside a different department: kitchen staff, maintenance, room service. He learned the intricate dance of keeping the hotel running and the struggles faced by the people who made it happen. Evenings were spent volunteering at a local community center. There, he served meals, sorted donations, and most importantly, listened. He heard stories of resilience from people who had faced prejudice, financial hardship, and systemic inequality. An elderly woman named Dolores shared her life's battles against discrimination, her voice steady but her words heavy with the weight of lived experience. "It's not just the big slights," she told James one evening. "It's the little ones, the assumptions, the dismissive looks, the way people like me are made to feel invisible. That's what cuts the deepest." Her words stayed with James, echoing in his mind as he lay awake at night. They forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about his own behavior, not just toward the Browns, but toward anyone he deemed unworthy of his time or respect. One evening, after a particularly long shift and another visit to the community center, James found himself sitting alone in the hotel lobby. He watched as guests checked in, as staff bustled to accommodate them. His perspective had shifted. He saw not just a luxurious operation, but the intricate human effort behind it all. Maria approached, a smirk on her face. "You've lasted longer than I expected." James laughed softly. "Not by much. My legs feel like they're about to give out." Maria's expression softened. "You've done well, James. People are starting to notice." He looked at her, surprised. "Notice what?" "That you're changing. We see it in the way you talk to us now, the way you listen." Maria paused. "It's not easy to admit when you're wrong. But it means something." James felt a lump rise in his throat. For so long, he had equated leadership with authority, with control. Now he was learning it had more to do with empathy, with understanding the people around him. The final test came one evening when Mr. Brown summoned James to his suite. Standing in the lavish room, James felt a pang of nervousness as he faced the man whose note had started this journey. "Mr. Stratton," Brown began, his tone neutral. "It's been a month since we last spoke. Tell me, what have you learned?" James took a deep breath. "I've learned how much I've taken for granted. The staff, the guests, even this hotel. I've been blind to the humanity behind it all. I see that now, and I want to do better, not just for myself, but for everyone who walks through these doors." Mr. Brown regarded him for a long moment before nodding. "Good. Change isn't a destination, Mr. Stratton. It's a journey. I hope you'll keep walking it." James left the suite feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. He knew he had a long road ahead, but for the first time, he felt ready to walk it. In the weeks that followed, James fully embraced his transformation. He implemented changes throughout the hotel, starting with a series of training sessions for the staff focused on empathy, diversity, and inclusion. These weren't superficial workshops, but in-depth, interactive experiences designed to help everyone, himself included, recognize unconscious biases and foster a culture of respect. James made it a point to personally participate in every session, sharing his own story as an example of growth and accountability. He spoke openly about the mistakes he had made and how they had served as a wake-up call. At first, the staff listened cautiously, unsure if his efforts were genuine. But as time went on, they began to see the depth of his commitment. Maria was the first to acknowledge it. "You've surprised me, James," she said one afternoon as they worked side by side inspecting rooms. "A few months ago, I never would have believed you could change this much." James smiled, the humility in her words striking a chord. "Neither would I, to be honest. But I've realized that change doesn't happen alone. It takes all of us." He didn't stop there. James began spending time in areas of the hotel he had previously ignored. The laundry room, the kitchens, even the parking garage, getting to know the people who kept the operation running smoothly. He asked about their lives, their families, their dreams. For the first time, he wasn't just a manager overseeing a workforce. He was a colleague and an ally. The changes extended to the guest experience as well. James led an initiative to create more inclusive policies and personalized services for guests from all walks of life. Staff were encouraged to treat every guest with the same warmth and professionalism, regardless of their background or appearance. The result was a noticeable shift in the hotel's atmosphere. It felt less like a rigid, impersonal institution and more like a welcoming home for travelers. The hotel's reputation flourished. Reviews praised not only the luxurious accommodations, but also the unparalleled hospitality. Guests commented on the attentiveness and kindness of the staff, crediting the hotel for making them feel truly valued. One day, as James was reviewing these glowing comments, he received an unexpected visitor, Robert Brown. "Mr. Brown," James said, standing quickly. "It's good to see you." Brown entered the office, his expression warm but reserved. "I've been hearing good things, Mr. Stratton, from the staff, the guests, even the board." James nodded, his heart swelling with a mix of pride and gratitude. "Thank you. I couldn't have done it without everyone's support." Brown studied him for a moment before speaking. "I wanted to tell you this in person. The board has decided to retain you as manager of this property. But more than that, we'd like you to oversee a new initiative, a mentorship program for rising managers across our hotels. We believe your journey can inspire others to lead with integrity." James blinked, momentarily stunned. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll accept," Brown replied with a small smile. "You've earned it." James extended his hand, shaking Brown's firmly. "Thank you. I won't let you down." That evening, James stood in the hotel's grand lobby, watching as guests arrived and staff moved seamlessly to meet their needs. For the first time in years, he felt not just pride, but purpose. This was no longer just his domain. It was a community he was honored to be a part of. As he turned to leave for the night, Maria called out to him, "Leaving already? Who are you, and what have you done with James Stratton?" He laughed, the sound genuine and light. "Just trying to be better, Maria. One day at a time." And for the first time, he truly believed it. The journey wasn't over, but James Stratton was finally on the right path. One where leadership meant lifting others up, where mistakes became lessons, and where every person who walked through the doors of the Paramount Regency Hotel felt they belonged. James's offer to help the elderly couple with home repairs turned into an entire weekend project. When he and Miguel arrived at the Carters' modest home early Saturday morning, the couple greeted them with warm smiles and steaming cups of coffee. The house, though quaint and filled with sentimental charm, clearly showed the wear of years of neglect. "The porch steps have been giving us trouble," Mr. Carter explained, gesturing to the wobbly wooden planks. "And there's a leak under the kitchen sink we just haven't been able to manage." James and Miguel exchanged a glance, nodding silently in agreement that they'd take care of it all. "We'll start with the steps," James said confidently, rolling up his sleeves. As they worked, sanding and replacing worn wood, James felt a surprising sense of satisfaction. Sweat trickled down his face and his hands were caked in dust, but the physical labor felt rewarding in a way he couldn't have imagined months ago. Miguel shared stories of similar volunteer work he'd done in his own community, giving James insight into the quiet strength and generosity of his colleague. "You've been doing things like this for a long time?" James asked, his voice tinged with admiration. Miguel shrugged. "Whenever I can. My neighbors back home always said, if you want to live in a good community, you have to build it yourself." James paused, letting the words sink in. "That's a good way to live," he murmured. Inside the house, the kitchen sink repair proved more challenging than expected, but with teamwork and a little improvisation, they managed to stop the persistent drip that had been troubling the Carters for months. When the work was done, Mrs. Carter insisted on serving them lunch in the garden, which, though overgrown, radiated the couple's love for nature. As they sat among wildflowers and tended plants, Mrs. Carter looked at James with a mix of gratitude and curiosity. "We never expected someone in your position to care so much," she said gently. James hesitated, caught off guard by the remark. "Honestly," he admitted, "I didn't always. But I've learned that caring isn't just an obligation. It's the foundation of everything." The couple exchanged a knowing glance, their expressions softening. "You've given us more than fixed steps and a working sink," Mr. Carter said. "You've restored something we thought we'd lost, a sense of community." As James and Miguel drove back to the hotel that evening, James felt a deep sense of accomplishment. The physical exhaustion from the day's labor didn't diminish the warmth spreading through his chest. This wasn't just about fixing things. It was about making people feel seen, valued, and connected. When Monday arrived, James returned to the hotel with a renewed sense of purpose. He began addressing long-standing issues that had gone unnoticed or ignored for years. First, he tackled pay disparities, ensuring staff across all departments received fair wages. Next, he pushed for better benefits, particularly for housekeeping and maintenance workers, whose contributions were often overlooked but vital to the hotel's success. James also introduced a new mentorship program. Senior staff members were paired with newer employees, fostering collaboration and providing a support system. Maria, who had spent years as a housekeeper, was paired with a young trainee named Elena. Watching Maria's patient guidance and Elena's eager learning brought a smile to James's face. The changes rippled through the hotel, affecting not only the staff but also the guests. Reviews began pouring in, praising not just the luxury of the accommodations but the warmth and attentiveness of the team. Longtime guests noted the difference. "This place feels different lately," remarked Mrs. Hanson, a regular visitor, during one of her check-ins. "It's as if the hotel has found its heart." James smiled warmly. "That's what we're striving for," he said. One afternoon, James noticed Maria sitting in the break room, her usual lively demeanor subdued. She stared into her cup of coffee, her shoulders hunched with visible tension. Concerned, James approached her. "Maria, is everything all right?" he asked gently, pulling up a chair. She hesitated, then sighed deeply. "It's my son. He's been sick, and I'm worried about missing work to take care of him. But I don't have much of a choice." In the past, James might have dismissed this as a personal matter, or told her to make arrangements without giving it a second thought. But now, he saw her plight through a different lens. "Take the time you need," he said firmly. "Your family comes first. We'll make it work here." Maria's eyes widened in surprise, then filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling. That means more than you know." James smiled. "Call me James." This small interaction sparked an idea. James realized that the well-being of his staff directly impacted the atmosphere of the hotel. He initiated a wellness program that included mental health support, paid family leave, and flexible scheduling for those with personal challenges. James's transformation extended beyond the walls of the hotel. His work at the local shelter continued, and each day brought new lessons. One morning, as he served breakfast, a young woman approached the counter with her toddler in tow. "Thank you," she said quietly, her eyes weary but kind. "You're welcome," James replied, offering the boy a small smile. "That's Melanie," Sarah, the shelter coordinator, whispered to James. "She's been staying here for a few weeks, fled an abusive relationship. She's trying to rebuild her life." James felt a pang in his chest. He thought of the times he had been impatient with guests at the hotel, oblivious to the burdens they might be carrying. Later that day, Melanie joined a group session hosted at the shelter. James, invited to observe, sat quietly in the corner as participants shared their stories. Melanie spoke hesitantly at first, but gained confidence as the group encouraged her. "I just want a stable home for my son," she said. "Somewhere safe, where we can start fresh." Her words lingered in James's mind long after the session ended. That evening, he found himself staring out at the city from the hotel rooftop, reflecting on how much he had taken for granted, the privileges he'd enjoyed, the power he wielded. They were tools he could use to help others, if only he chose to. The following week, James attended a diversity and inclusion workshop held at the hotel. Dr. Amelia Chen, an engaging facilitator, opened the session with an exercise that required participants to share moments when they had felt excluded or judged. James listened as his colleagues opened up, their stories raw and honest. Maria spoke about being overlooked for opportunities because of her accent, while Mark, a wheelchair user, described how people often assumed he couldn't handle certain tasks. When it was James's turn, he hesitated. But then, with a deep breath, he spoke about his own journey, about the Williams family, his biases, and how he was working to change. "I'm learning every day," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "And I'm sorry for the harm I've caused in the past." The room was silent for a moment before Sarah, the receptionist, said softly, "Thank you for sharing, James. It takes courage to admit when you're wrong." The workshop left James with a deeper understanding of how his actions and assumptions could impact others. He made a point to share what he had learned with the entire staff, creating a space for open dialogue and mutual growth. In the days following the workshop, James found himself viewing his surroundings with new eyes. Every interaction became an opportunity to practice what he had learned. At the front desk, he noticed Sarah deftly handling a flustered guest who had misplaced their reservation. "Is everything all right?" James asked after the guest left. Sarah nodded, her professionalism unwavering. "It happens. People get stressed, especially when they travel." "I admire how you handled that," James said sincerely. "You kept your cool and made the guest feel heard. That's exactly the kind of service we want to provide." Sarah blinked, clearly surprised by the compliment. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling. That means a lot coming from you." "Call me James," he replied, smiling warmly. These moments of connection became more frequent. James's efforts to engage with the staff created a ripple effect, fostering an environment of trust and mutual respect. His past reputation as a strict and distant manager began to fade, replaced by one of approachability and understanding. One afternoon, James overheard two employees discussing a colleague, Elena, who was struggling with her new housekeeping role. "She's too slow," one of them said. "If she doesn't pick up the pace, she's not going to last." James approached them calmly. "What's going on with Elena?" he asked, his tone curious rather than accusatory. The employees hesitated before one said, "She's just having a hard time keeping up." "It's a tough job, you know?" James nodded thoughtfully. "Instead of letting her struggle, let's offer her some guidance. Maybe Maria can mentor her. She's one of our best." The employees exchanged glances, then nodded. "That's a good idea, Mr. Sterling." Later, James pulled Maria aside and shared his plan. Maria agreed enthusiastically, taking Elena under her wing. Over time, Elena's confidence grew, and her performance improved. When James saw her smiling and chatting with colleagues during a break, he felt a swell of pride. Not in himself, but in the team he was helping to build. James's involvement in the community also deepened. Inspired by his experiences at the shelter, he organized a partnership between the hotel and several local charities. The hotel began hosting fundraising events, donating leftover food to shelters, and offering training programs for individuals seeking to re-enter the workforce. One evening, James attended a job fair at a community center. As he manned the hotel's booth, he spoke with dozens of people, many of whom had faced significant barriers to employment. A young man named Darren caught his attention. "I've been looking for work for months," Darren said. "But it's tough. People see my past and don't give me a chance." "What kind of work are you interested in?" James asked. "I'll do anything," Darren said earnestly. "I just want to prove myself." James nodded, impressed by the young man's determination. "Why don't you come by the hotel tomorrow? Let's see if we can find a role that fits your skills." The next day, Darren arrived at the hotel for an interview. With James's encouragement, he was hired as a porter. Over the following weeks, Darren thrived in his role, earning praise from guests and colleagues alike. Seeing Darren succeed reminded James of the power of second chances. He began advocating for more inclusive hiring practices at the hotel, ensuring that opportunities were extended to those who had traditionally been overlooked. One evening, as James walked through the lobby, he spotted Robert Brown entering the hotel. This time, Brown's demeanor was noticeably lighter. "James," he said, shaking his hand firmly, "I've been hearing incredible things about the changes you've made here." "Thank you," James replied, his voice steady but humble. "It's been a team effort." Brown smiled. "That's what I like to hear. The board has been impressed by the results. Not just the improved reviews, but the sense of purpose you've instilled in this place, and we think you're ready for a larger role." James raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you have in mind?" "We want you to lead a company-wide initiative on diversity and inclusion," Brown said. "Your journey here has set an example, and we believe you can inspire others to follow suit." James felt a swell of emotion. The man who had once judged others so harshly was now being entrusted with the responsibility of fostering compassion and understanding on a larger scale. "I'd be honored," he said, his voice firm with conviction. The next morning, James began preparing for his new role with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The opportunity to lead the company's diversity and inclusion initiative was a tremendous honor, but it also came with significant responsibility. He was determined not to let down those who had placed their trust in him. One of his first steps was to create a task force that included employees from all levels of the company. He wanted to ensure every voice was heard, from entry-level staff to senior executives. Maria, Miguel, Sarah, and Darren were among the first he invited to join. During the task force's initial meeting, James encouraged open discussion. "This initiative isn't about me," he said. "It's about all of us. What ideas do you have for making our hotels more inclusive and welcoming for everyone?" At first, there was silence. Then Maria spoke up. "I think we need more training, like the workshops we've been doing here, but not just once. It should be ongoing, so it becomes part of our culture." Miguel nodded. "And we should translate materials into multiple languages. Not everyone speaks English fluently, and that can make people feel excluded." Sarah added, "We could also create mentorship programs for new hires, especially those who come from disadvantaged backgrounds." As the ideas flowed, James took careful notes, his enthusiasm growing. The task force's collective passion and insight reaffirmed his belief that real change came from collaboration. Over the next few months, James worked tirelessly to implement the task force's recommendations. Each hotel in the chain began hosting regular workshops on unconscious bias, cultural competency, and inclusive leadership. Materials were translated into multiple languages, and mentorship programs were established to support employees' personal and professional growth. James also spearheaded a partnership with local nonprofits to create a scholarship fund for underprivileged youth interested in hospitality careers. The program provided not only financial support, but also internships and mentorship opportunities within the company. The impact of these initiatives was immediate and profound. Employees across the organization reported feeling more valued and empowered. Guest satisfaction scores soared, with many praising the warmth and attentiveness of the staff. One evening, as James reviewed a report on the company's progress, he received a message from Robert Brown. It was a simple note, but its words carried immense weight. "You've done something remarkable, James. Thank you for proving that change is possible." James sat back in his chair, a sense of pride washing over him. He thought back to the man he had been when he first confronted the Williams family, rigid, judgmental, and blind to his own biases. That man felt like a distant memory now. Months later, James stood in front of a packed ballroom at the company's annual leadership conference. Executives, managers, and staff from across the organization had gathered to celebrate the year's achievements. As he stepped up to the podium, James took a moment to look out at the crowd. He saw familiar faces: Maria, Miguel, Sarah, Darren, and countless others whose lives had intersected with his own over the past year. "When I first started working in this industry," James began, his voice steady, "I believed that leadership was about control and authority. I thought my job was to enforce rules and maintain standards no matter the cost. But I was wrong." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "True leadership isn't about power. It's about people. It's about creating an environment where everyone feels seen, valued, and supported. It's about listening, learning, and growing, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable." James shared the story of his journey, the mistakes he had made, the lessons he had learned, and the people who had helped him along the way. He spoke about the Williams family and how their grace had been a turning point in his life. "Change isn't easy," he concluded, "but it's always worth it. And if I can change, so can anyone. Together, we can build something extraordinary, not just a successful company, but a community where everyone belongs." The room erupted in applause, but James didn't bask in it. Instead, he looked out at the faces before him, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for the journey that had brought him here. As the conference ended and attendees began to mingle, Maria approached James, her expression a mixture of pride and amusement. "You know," she said, "if someone had told me a year ago that you'd be up there giving a speech like that, I wouldn't have believed it." James chuckled. "Neither would I. But here we are." Maria smiled. "Here we are." Later that evening, James returned to his hotel room, reflecting on everything that had led to this moment. The journey wasn't over. There would always be more to learn, more to do. But for the first time in his life, he felt truly aligned with his purpose. As he looked out at the city lights, he thought about the countless people who had shaped his transformation, the staff who had taught him humility, the shelter residents who had shown him resilience, and the Williams family who had sparked it all. He made a silent vow to carry their lessons with him always, to honor their impact by continuing to lead with empathy and integrity. James Sterling had changed, and in doing so, he had helped change the world around him. James' commitment to helping the community deepened as the food drive gained momentum. He transformed an unused space in the hotel's basement into a temporary storage area for the donations. Every day, staff and guests arrived with bags of canned goods, boxes of cereal, and other essential items. What started as a small initiative soon turned into a hotel-wide effort. One afternoon, as James was sorting donations with some shelter volunteers, Marcus, a longtime helper, patted him on the shoulder. "You've really made a difference here, James," Marcus said, his voice filled with admiration. "I don't think I've seen this kind of enthusiasm before." James felt a warmth spread through his chest. "I'm just doing my part," he said humbly. "But seeing how much everyone else has pitched in, it's inspiring." That evening, as James walked through the shelter's dining area, he noticed a mother and her teenage son seated in a corner. Their plates were empty, and they appeared hesitant to join the others lining up for seconds. James approached them with a gentle smile. "Would you like some more to eat?" he asked softly. The mother hesitated, then nodded. "If it's not too much trouble." "It's no trouble at all," James replied, heading to the kitchen to fill their plates himself. When he returned, the teenager looked up at him with shy gratitude. "Thank you, sir," he said quietly. James crouched down to meet the boy's gaze. "My name's James, and you're very welcome." Moments like these fueled James's resolve. He wasn't just learning about the struggles others faced, he was witnessing the resilience and humanity that thrived despite those challenges. As the days passed, James found his coworkers increasingly joining him in volunteer efforts. Maria organized a clothing drive, collecting items for families in need. Miguel began offering free plumbing services to the shelter, fixing issues that had plagued the building for years. One weekend, James rallied a group of staff members to repaint the shelter's dining hall, transforming the once dull space into a bright and welcoming area. The walls were adorned with cheerful murals designed by local artists, creating a sense of pride among the shelter's residents. During a break, Sarah, who had been meticulously painting a corner, turned to James. "I never thought I'd see the day when our team would be doing something like this together," she said with a smile. "It's amazing, isn't it?" James replied, his voice filled with awe. "We're not just a team anymore. We're a family." One evening, after a long day at the shelter, James overheard two of his colleagues talking in the parking lot. "I never thought I'd say this," one said, "but James has really changed. He's not doing this for show. He actually cares." The other nodded. "Yeah, I look forward to working with him now. He's different, in a good way." James quietly slipped away, his heart full. Hearing those words reinforced his belief that his efforts were making a difference, not just in the community but in how others saw him. As James's month-long journey of labor and community service approached its end, he found himself filled with a mix of emotions. The once prideful manager now looked at the world through entirely different eyes. His heart, softened by the experiences he had shared with his co-workers and the community, brimmed with gratitude. On his final day at the shelter, James arrived early, as had become his habit. He busied himself in the kitchen, stirring a large pot of oatmeal for the regulars he now knew by name. As he worked, he caught his reflection in the polished surface of a pot. The face staring back at him looked different, not just physically, with a slight tan from outdoor work and muscles earned through manual labor, but in the eyes. They held a kindness and understanding that hadn't been there before. "James, my man," Marcus called out as he entered the kitchen. "We're sure gonna miss you around here. You've been a real blessing." James turned, a lump forming in his throat. "I'm going to miss being here too," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "I've learned so much from all of you." As breakfast was served, James took extra time with each person, memorizing their faces and stories. What had started as a punishment had become a profound gift, the gift of perspective, empathy, and genuine human connection. Later that afternoon, James returned to the hotel to find a surprise waiting for him. A group of co-workers had gathered in the break room, where a small cake sat on the table with the words, "We'll miss you, James." Overwhelmed, James felt tears prick his eyes. "I don't know what to say," he stammered. "Thank you all so much. You've taught me more than you'll ever know." Maria stepped forward, handing him a card signed by everyone. "We just wanted you to know how much we appreciate you. You've become one of us, James." As James looked around at the faces of people he now considered friends, he felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The past month had changed him in ways he never thought possible, and he knew these lessons would stay with him forever. James stepped back into the hotel lobby the next morning, dressed once again in his crisp manager's suit. The familiar sights and sounds of the luxury establishment surrounded him, but everything felt different now. He paused at the entrance, straightened his tie, and walked with purpose toward the front desk. "Good morning, Sarah," he greeted the receptionist warmly. "How are you today?" Sarah looked up, surprised by the gentleness in his voice. "I'm good, Mr. Sterling. Thank you for asking." James smiled genuinely. "I'm glad to hear that. And please call me James." Throughout the day, James made a conscious effort to connect with each member of his staff. He listened attentively to their concerns, offered words of encouragement, and even rolled up his sleeves to help during busy moments. During the afternoon rush, he noticed a young family struggling with their luggage. Without hesitation, James approached them with a warm smile. "Welcome to our hotel. May I assist you with your bags?" The family looked taken aback, but gratefully accepted his help. As James carried their suitcases to the elevator, he engaged them in friendly conversation, ensuring they felt comfortable and valued. Later, James visited the kitchen, where he personally thanked the chefs and dishwashers for their hard work. "Your dedication is what makes this place special," he told them sincerely. "I want you to know how much I appreciate each of you." The kitchen staff exchanged surprised but appreciative glances. Maria, who was finishing up a large tray of desserts, smiled knowingly. "You've come a long way, James," she said softly. "I've had a lot of good teachers," he replied, his gratitude evident. As the day progressed, word of James's transformation spread quickly. Employees who had once feared his stern demeanor now found themselves looking forward to interactions with him. Guests commented on the positive energy that seemed to permeate the hotel. By the end of his shift, James felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He had made a difference, not through strict rules or harsh authority, but through kindness and understanding. As he prepared to leave, he noticed an elderly guest struggling to put on her coat near the lobby entrance. He stepped forward without hesitation. "May I help you with that, ma'am?" he asked gently. The woman smiled warmly as he held the coat for her. "Thank you, young man. That's very kind of you." "It's my pleasure," James replied, his heart lifting at her words. The next morning, as the sun rose over the city, a sleek black car pulled up to the hotel's entrance. Mr. Williams stepped out, his demeanor calm yet purposeful. This time, there was no attempt to hide his identity. He was here as an openly recognized board member, ready to observe the changes he had set in motion. The lobby buzzed with activity. Guests were checking in and out, and staff moved with efficiency and grace. Mr. Williams stood back, taking in the scene with a critical yet hopeful eye. He didn't have to wait long to spot James. Dressed in his manager's suit, James was assisting a family at the front desk. Mr. Williams watched as James knelt to speak to the children, who were fidgeting impatiently while their parents finalized their check-in. "I bet you're excited to see your room," James said with a warm smile. "How about we bring up some hot chocolate for you while your parents finish here?" The children's faces lit up, and their parents exchanged relieved smiles. Mr. Williams nodded approvingly, noting the genuine care in James's demeanor. A short while later, Mr. Williams observed James assisting an elderly woman struggling with her bags. "Ma'am, please allow me to help you with those," James offered, his tone gentle. The woman looked up, surprised but grateful. "Thank you, young man. That's very kind of you." Mr. Williams smiled as he continued to observe. Throughout the morning, James interacted with guests and staff alike, his actions marked by warmth and sincerity. He knelt to tie a young boy's shoelace, helped a frazzled businessman locate his misplaced briefcase, and took the time to personally thank the cleaning staff for their hard work. When James passed by, Mr. Williams stepped forward, ready to make his presence known. "Mr. Sterling," he called out, his voice carrying across the lobby. James turned at the sound of his name, his eyes widening in recognition. A mixture of emotions crossed his face: respect, gratitude, and a hint of nervousness. He walked over to Mr. Williams, his posture straight but relaxed. "Mr. Williams," James said warmly, "it's good to see you, sir." Mr. Williams smiled, extending his hand. "It's good to see you too, James. I've been watching you this morning. You've been quite busy." James shook Mr. Williams's hand firmly. "Would you like to talk somewhere more private?" he asked, gesturing toward a quiet corner of the lobby. As they settled into a pair of armchairs near the large lobby windows, James took a deep breath, preparing himself for the conversation. He wasn't sure what Mr. Williams might say, but he felt ready to face it no matter the outcome. "Mr. Williams," James began, his voice steady but earnest, "I can't thank you enough for what you've done for me. The opportunity you gave me, it changed my life." Mr. Williams leaned forward slightly, his expression calm yet attentive. "Tell me more, James. How do you feel about the journey you've been on?" James paused, gathering his thoughts. "I was wrong before. So wrong. I let my pride, my biases, and my assumptions guide how I treated people. The time I spent working with the staff and serving in the community opened my eyes. I saw the world differently for the first time." Mr. Williams nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving James's. "And what did you learn?" "I learned that leadership isn't about authority or control," James said, his voice filled with emotion. "It's about empathy. It's about lifting people up, not tearing them down. Every person, whether they're a guest, a staff member, or someone in the community, deserves respect and kindness. I can see that now, and I'll carry that with me for the rest of my life." Mr. Williams's expression softened. "That's what growth is all about, James, seeing beyond your own experiences and understanding others, and it sounds like you've done exactly that." James felt his chest tighten with gratitude. "I'm thankful every day, not just for keeping my job, but for the chance to become a better person. I hope I can make a real difference here now." "You already are," Mr. Williams replied warmly. "I've seen the way you interact with the guests, how you treat the staff. There's a new atmosphere in this hotel, one of mutual respect and genuine care. That's because of you." James blinked rapidly, his emotions threatening to overwhelm him. "Thank you, sir. I promise to keep learning and growing. I want to ensure that everyone who walks through these doors feels welcome and valued." Inspired by his transformative journey, James threw himself into creating lasting change at the hotel. He spent evenings brainstorming new initiatives, drawing from his experiences and the lessons he had learned. One morning, he requested a meeting with Mr. Williams to present his ideas. They sat together in the hotel's conference room, and James laid out his vision for a comprehensive initiative focused on diversity, inclusion, and respect. "Mr. Williams," James began, his voice steady and confident, "I believe we have an opportunity to make our hotel a model of inclusivity in the hospitality industry." Mr. Williams leaned forward, intrigued. "Go on, James. I'm listening." James outlined his ideas with enthusiasm. "First, I propose mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all staff members, from housekeeping to management. This would cover topics like unconscious bias, cultural sensitivity, and respectful communication." He continued, "We could also implement a mentorship program, pairing employees from different backgrounds to foster understanding and collaboration. And I think it's crucial that we review our hiring practices to ensure we're attracting and retaining a diverse workforce." Mr. Williams nodded, encouraging James to elaborate further. For our guests, James added, we could create a welcome package celebrating diversity. It might include information about local cultural events and recommendations for minority-owned businesses. And finally, we should establish a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind, ensuring that everyone feels respected here. When James finished, Mr. Williams sat back in his chair, a smile spreading across his face. James, I'm impressed, he said. This initiative shows real thought and commitment. It's clear you've taken your experiences to heart. Thank you, sir, James replied. I truly believe this can make a difference, not just for our hotel, but for our community as well. The board of directors convened for their quarterly meeting, with James's initiative as a key item on the agenda. Mr. Williams presented the proposal, recounting James's transformation and the positive changes already taking place at the hotel. The board members listened intently, their faces showing surprise and admiration. When Mr. Williams finished, the room fell silent for a moment before they began voicing their support. This is exactly the kind of forward-thinking approach we need, one member said enthusiastically. It's not just good for our image, it's the right thing to do. Another nodded in agreement. I'm impressed by the depth of this plan. James has clearly put a lot of thought and heart into it. The vote was unanimous. The board fully endorsed the initiative, allocating a significant budget to ensure its success. When Mr. Williams stepped out of the boardroom, James stood anxiously in the hallway. James, Mr. Williams said, his voice warm with approval. The board was extremely impressed. They've given us the green light to move forward with the initiative. James's face lit up with joy and relief. That's wonderful news, sir. Thank you for your support. There's more, Mr. Williams added, his tone serious but encouraging. The board wants you to lead this initiative. They believe your journey and newfound perspective make you the ideal person to drive this change. James felt a surge of excitement and nervousness. I'm honored, sir. It's a big responsibility, but I'll give it everything I have. I have no doubt about that, Mr. Williams replied with a smile. And I'll be here to guide you every step of the way. James dedicated himself fully to leading the new initiative. He worked tirelessly to develop a comprehensive program that would address diversity, inclusion, and respect at every level of the hotel's operations. His first step was to organize a series of workshops for the staff, drawing from his own experiences and the valuable lessons he had learned during his journey. The workshops were designed to foster open dialogue and personal reflection. James collaborated with expert facilitators to tailor the sessions to the hotel's unique environment. Topics ranged from recognizing unconscious bias to practicing cultural sensitivity and effective communication. On the day of the first workshop, James stood at the front of the room, facing a mix of curious and skeptical faces. Taking a deep breath, he began to speak. I know some of you might be wondering why we're here, he said, his voice steady and sincere. A few months ago, I wouldn't have understood either. But I've learned that creating a truly welcoming environment isn't just good business. It's the right thing to do. James shared his personal journey with the group, describing the mistakes he had made and the transformative lessons that had opened his eyes. His vulnerability resonated with the staff, many of whom nodded in recognition of their own experiences or those of their colleagues. The workshops included role-playing exercises that encouraged employees to practice handling difficult situations with empathy and respect. In one scenario, a front desk agent was tasked with assisting a frustrated guest who spoke limited English. In another, a housekeeping supervisor addressed a team conflict rooted in cultural misunderstandings. To James's relief and joy, the sessions were well received. After each workshop, employees approached him to share their thoughts. Thank you for creating this space, Maria said after one session. It feels good to be heard and to know we're working towards something better. Miguel added, I never thought we'd have conversations like this at work. It's refreshing and important. As the weeks passed, James noticed a palpable shift in the hotel's atmosphere. Staff members began interacting with one another more openly and kindly, bridging divides that had once seemed insurmountable. Guests, too, began to comment on the hotel's welcoming environment, praising the warmth and attentiveness of the staff. One day, James was reviewing guest feedback when a comment caught his eye. "I've stayed in many hotels, but this one feels different. The staff go out of their way to make you feel valued, no matter who you are. It's like they truly care." James smiled, feeling a deep sense of pride. This wasn't just about policies or training. It was about creating a culture of respect and empathy that touched everyone who walked through the hotel's doors. The initiative's success didn't go unnoticed. Industry publications began writing about the hotel's innovative approach, praising its efforts to set a new standard for inclusivity in hospitality. Local media highlighted James's personal transformation, casting him as a leader who had turned his life around to make a positive impact. One sunny morning, James arrived at his office to find an envelope on his desk. Inside was an invitation to a prestigious hospitality awards ceremony. The hotel had been nominated for Best Diversity and Inclusion Initiative, a recognition that validated months of hard work. At the ceremony, James sat among industry leaders, his heart pounding with anticipation. When the announcer called the hotel's name as the winner, the room erupted in applause. James made his way to the stage, his emotions swirling as he accepted the award. "This recognition isn't just for me," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It belongs to every member of our staff who worked tirelessly to create a welcoming environment for all our guests. And it belongs to every guest who shared their stories and helped us learn and grow. Together, we've shown that change is possible." The celebration continued at the hotel, where the staff gathered to mark the milestone. The atmosphere was one of pure joy, with employees from all departments mingling and laughing together. Maria raised a glass to toast James, her voice brimming with pride. "To James," she said, "for showing us what true leadership looks like." James smiled, his heart full as the room erupted in cheers. As James walked through the lobby the next morning, he overheard two guests talking. "There's something special about this place," one said. "Everyone here seems genuinely happy. You can feel it in the way they treat you." Hearing those words, James felt a warmth spread through his chest. This was the real measure of success, not awards or recognition, but the genuine happiness and comfort of the people who walked through the hotel's doors. Later that day, James stood by the large window in his office, gazing out at the bustling city below. The setting sun cast a golden glow over the skyline, mirroring the warmth he felt in his heart. On his desk sat a framed photo of the hotel staff, smiling and standing arm in arm. James picked it up, his thumb brushing over the faces of people he now considered friends. He thought back to the day the Williams family had checked in, remembering the harsh words he had spoken and the assumptions he had made. The memory still stung, but it no longer filled him with shame. Instead, it served as a reminder of how far he had come. James reflected on the grueling days of labor, the eye-opening experiences at the shelter, and the heartfelt conversations with his coworkers. Each moment had chipped away at his old prejudices, replacing them with empathy and understanding. He smiled to himself, knowing his journey was far from over. There was always more to learn and more ways to grow, but he was grateful for how far he had come and excited for what lay ahead. James stood at the podium that evening, addressing a crowd gathered in the hotel's grand ballroom. The event, a celebration of the hotel's diversity and inclusion initiative, was alive with energy. Guests, staff, and community members filled the space, their faces illuminated by the warm glow of chandeliers. Vibrant decorations adorned the room, and inspirational messages celebrating unity and respect were displayed on banners around the stage. "Good evening, everyone," James began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Thank you for joining us tonight as we celebrate not just an initiative, but a movement. A commitment to making this hotel a place where everyone feels valued and respected." His eyes scanned the room, landing on Mr. Williams and his family seated near the front. Mr. Williams nodded encouragingly, his pride evident. "A year ago," James continued, "I wouldn't have imagined standing here. Back then, I thought leadership was about control, about maintaining order at any cost. But thanks to the guidance of some incredible people, I've learned what true leadership looks like. It's about compassion. It's about lifting others up. It's about creating an environment where everyone can thrive. James paused, letting his words settle. Tonight, I want to share a few stories of transformation, he said. Stories that reflect the power of unity and understanding. He spoke of Miguel, whose resilience and dedication had inspired his colleagues. He shared how Maria's mentorship of new staff members had fostered a sense of belonging, and how Darren, the young man hired after the job fair, had become a shining example of perseverance. These stories are just the beginning, James said. They remind us that change is possible when we open our hearts and minds. The room erupted in applause as James concluded his speech. Stepping down from the podium, he was met with warm handshakes and heartfelt hugs from guests and staff alike. When he reached the Williams family, Mr. Williams stood and extended his hand. "James," he said, his voice filled with pride, "you've exceeded all our expectations. What you've accomplished here is remarkable." James shook Mr. Williams's hand, his eyes glistening with gratitude. "Thank you, sir. I couldn't have done it without your guidance and the support of this amazing team." Mrs. Williams smiled warmly. "You've created something special here, James. It's clear that your journey has touched many lives." As the celebration continued, James moved through the crowd, taking time to speak with guests and staff. The room buzzed with laughter and conversation, a testament to the sense of community that had grown within the hotel. At one point, James found himself standing near Maria and Miguel, who were engaged in animated conversation with a group of kitchen staff. "James," Maria called out, waving him over, "come join us." He approached with a smile, feeling a deep sense of belonging. "We were just talking about how much has changed over the past year," Miguel said. "It feels like a completely different place." "That's because of all of you," James replied. "You've shown me what's possible when we work together." As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, James stepped outside to the hotel's terrace. The cool night air was refreshing, and the city lights twinkled like stars against the dark sky. Mr. Williams joined him, his hands tucked into the pockets of his coat. For a moment, they stood in comfortable silence, watching the city bustle below. "You've done something remarkable here, James," Mr. Williams said, breaking the silence. "But I hope you know that this is just the beginning." James nodded. "I do. There's still so much to learn and so much more we can do. But I'm excited for what's ahead." Mr. Williams smiled. "That's the attitude of a true leader." The next morning, James arrived at the hotel with a renewed sense of purpose. As he walked through the lobby, he greeted staff members by name, stopping to chat with each of them. "Good morning, Darren," he said as he passed the bellhop station. "How's your family?" "They're doing great, James," Darren replied with a smile. "Thanks for asking." In the housekeeping department, James checked in with Maria, who was training a new hire. "How's it going?" he asked. "Great," Maria said. "Elena is a fast learner. She's going to be a great addition to the team." James smiled. "I knew she would be, with you as her mentor." As the day unfolded, James reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. From the humbling experiences of labor and community service to the heartfelt connections he had formed with his staff, every step had shaped him into a better leader and a better person. The lessons he had learned would stay with him forever, guiding him in every decision he made. And as he looked around at the thriving hotel and the people who made it special, James felt a deep sense of gratitude and fulfillment. This was more than a job. It was a calling, a chance to create a space where everyone felt valued, respected, and at home.